Hello there. Today we'll take a look at this game. It doesn't really have any specific theme, I would say. It's just a quite interesting and complicated game, but hopefully we take away something from it. So it starts as some modern defense, or I guess perk you can call it, since the knight has been developed. White develops quite sensibly. This is one of the setups, mainly connected to f3 and trying to kind of play a Yugoslav attack. c6 is, I guess, the main move for black, or at least one of the main moves, trying to play b5 and not castling yet because that might run into a quick attack. So h3, and h3 is an interesting move. It's usually connected to not allowing knight g4. In these positions there's not really any reason to play g4, to prepare g4 with h3, since g4 has the point of playing h5 eventually, so playing h5 in 3 moves doesn't really make sense. If we really want to play g4, it's usually connected to f3. But mainly, if you play h3 here, it's usually connected to developing with knight f3 and not allowing knight to g4, harassing the bishop. But I think white kind of mixed up his ideas here. So b5 happened, bishop d3, castles. And here white comments in his game that this was all theory, but I would ask, if this was all theory, why has white used 3 minutes? This is quite a common mistake when we mistake theory for, let's just say, general useful moves, just typical moves. h3 might be useful, this might be right, this might be right, who knows? But if we haven't studied this concrete position, we cannot call this concretely theory. We can just call it some kind of moves. So theory would be moves that we can play automatically. Usually that's the jargon for these things. Here white played bishop h6, and this is kind of inaccurate, and it doesn't really make sense in seeing as how white has developed. The point of bishop h6, and this is kind of very important to understand, there are a few certain points connected with bishop h6. One, and the most common one, is to get rid of this defender and then play h4, h5, and then take, and then play queen h6, and then give checkmate, right? Just like in the dragon. This plan doesn't really make sense if we have played h3, right? So I guess bishop h6 is not connected with that. Another reason to play bishop h6 could be to just simply get rid of a strong piece. But here, this bishop doesn't really influence the center too much, at least for now. The knight is well placed on f6, it's blocking the bishop. And also, black always has the possibility of playing e5, transposing into some kind of Ruy Lopez type position, or Italian, or whatever you call it, where this bishop exchange would definitely favor only black. So positionally, this is a mistake. This can only be justified if white continues to attack after getting rid of one defender. So here white should just continue with his modest setup, which he has chosen with h3, and then castle kingside, and then play for some minimal advantage, and this is quite a safe position with the center. Instead, bishop h6, a5. Again, black has to understand that this game isn't really going to be, at least it's not supposed to be, a two-way attack with castling on opposite sides. White has played too slowly for that, so black should instead just develop his pieces and not push too many pawns without any reason, since a5 doesn't really do anything for his position. And knight b7 is fine, playing e5 maybe next. As this exchange is inevitable, black can afford to block his bishop, which will not be there anyway, quite soon. So a5, white exchanges, then plays f4. So I guess with a5 played, white can afford this, as this was a waste of tempo, as well as this, since it's not clear yet which way white will castle. White can definitely castle kingside still, since the king will be quite safe here, and the knight will come out behind the pawn. So b4 happened, and then white played knight a4, blocking the pawn advance, but here it's not clear why we have to block the pawn advance, since white's king it doesn't necessarily have to go here, and white can instead try to develop more naturally, let's say like this, knight b7 or something, and maybe play e5 at some point. And again, it's not clear which way white will castle. It doesn't really matter too much, since white is just taking space in the center, and that's the main thing of the position. White probably shouldn't castle queenside in this kind of position, as these pawns do pose some threat, potentially. Well, b4 happened, knight e4, bishop a6. So, of course, with this f4 move, one thing white always has to consider is this e4 square, which will never be defended again, and this is correctly pointed out by the player in his notes. Knight f3, knight b7. And yes, if black were to take here, taking back with the c pawn is quite smart, opening the c file since this is a potential weakness. And also, again, white hasn't castled queenside. He doesn't have to. He can castle kingside. And this is a good position for white. So knight b7 happened, and white goes queenside, which again seems a bit unnecessary to go for some two-side attack, because now in theory white has to push his pawns on the king side to attack. Just playing e5 is not enough. Again, it's important to think about what's the point of e5. Mainly it's to get rid of this defender of the king, so that then we can attack like this. If we're playing with h3 and putting our knights on the rim like this, it seems like white is going for more of a positional game. Also, a bit more concretely, I assume white missed this very strong move by black, bishop b5, which is rather typical here, trying to get rid of this knight. And the knight is kind of stuck. White cannot take because he will lose. And after b3, he can either take or even play knight b6, getting rid of this blockade. And it's clear that white has chosen incorrectly to go for opposite sides castling, because he is way behind in this race. Black will go a4 very soon, while this is not happening anytime soon. Also, the f-pawn is actually blocking the queen. So this was a bad mistake by white. He should just play e5, which is quite topical. For example, knight d5. White can take h4 maybe. It's not yet clear if the king will go there or there. Again, white can go kingside. There's nothing too wrong with this. But of course, the main plan here is to attack like this. For example, h5, f5. It seems white shouldn't even lose a tempo with castling. The attack is quite strong. But of course, this requires further analysis. Anyway, this happened. This time white didn't recapture with the pawn for some reason. Of course, it seems kind of scary to get rid of one of the defenders, but white's king should be quite fine on b1. Instead, d5 happened, and black gets a nice square on e4 in case white goes e5. And the position is quite equal, but it seems that black is kind of taking over here, though of course both sides have their chances, like this and also like this. So knight d2 happened, a few moves pass and the position clears up. Now no one really has an advantage, and there's not really any very serious attacks going on. The knight on a4 is blocking the position quite nicely, and this is still kind of far away. Rook h f1, white plays to defend the pawn and also play f5. f5 is allowed, and then black plays this very strange move, queen h2, which is kind of hard to comprehend, as in black's best interest really shouldn't be taking some pawn on g2. Instead, black has to go for the counterattack. One strange but nice move is queen b8, the main point being to threaten queen b5, which would almost trap the knight, or exchange queens, which is in black's favor in general. But queen h2 was played. Rook d2 seems a bit passive. White can just continue with his plan of going f6 with g4. Okay, rook d2. Black goes back. Now the f file is a topic. g4 happened. And the white queen goes to e2. And it seems that now that the race has begun, black really hasn't made any progress. Again, his only plan seems to be to put the queen on b5, but now he is a bit too late for that. Rook a d8 happened. It's already quite difficult to play for black. He should probably improve the queen with tempo, We'll also put the king on g8. And hopefully play c5 at some point if possible. Again, to get rid of this knight. But already it seems that white is the one playing for an advantage. Here g5 happened, though probably it was better to include one more piece. One of the points is that this knight doesn't really have to be here anymore since the rook has moved from a8. Of course, it is quite risky to give up the pawn like this, but concretely this works out, specifically because black cannot really take back here because of the pin on the f pawn, and also this tactic with rook f7. But knight e6 is also possible. So when we attack, it's good to include as many pieces as possible. Well, in the position g5, didn't really achieve anything concrete. f6 happened, but I think this kind of just blocks black's attack. If we think about it, the only way for white to win this is to put up queen on g7 after getting rid of this knight, which seems a bit hard to do logistically now that this knight is far away from the picture. Rook g1 happened. It's important to note that here white has about 20 seconds against black's 5 minutes, so in general in these positions blunders tend to happen. Here black played rook d4 rather quickly, and he simply missed white's threat of queen h5, after which black resigned. Instead, black should develop with tempo, rook f8, and this is the whole point, rook e1. Of course, this is not too easy to find, but it's not the only way to play either. Black can also simply move the king to get rid of this pin. And it seems that this pawn is more of a weakness than a strength. These rooks are not really very effectual. This queen is not very good, this pawn is bad, this knight is bad. So positionally black is a bit better here and he can continue to press. But as so happens in chess, one moment of concentrational collapse and the game is over after some simple capture. So again, there were many interesting positional moments here. I think the main takeaways are that white should kind of commit on one of the schemes of development, because playing h3 and then playing aggressively doesn't really make much sense. You either play positionally or you play aggressively, and this is something white has to decide on. This setup is quite universal, as from here white can still choose. He can either play with h3, knight f3, or he can play f3 castles and h4, h5, etc. Or he can even start with bishop h6. This is the historically main move. So white can develop like this and then choose what he wants to do in general. But h3 is usually connected to prophylaxis and playing logically positionally. And this bishop h6 move, of course it's very stereotypical, but it's not really a good idea to exchange these bishops if the pawns are going to be on dark squares for black anyway. Well, we have this bishop. So this doesn't really work with h3. And this has to be continued with a quick attack to justify the positional mistake, so to say. So that's that.